So I would like to start with the quote, we need a free media, not just freedom of speech, to express our thoughts and views beyond any boundary of ours and to create ethical awareness. I, Kumar Kanishk, is here as your host for the technical session 4 of media content, news analysis, and ethical issues. A pleasant good afternoon to our chairperson, Dr. Anubhuti Yadav, co-chair, Ms. Yashashvika Yadav, Dr. Amrish Saxena, Professor and Dean, DME Media School, Director of DME Studios and Production, Dr. Sushmita Bala, Professor and HOD, DME Media School, and to one and all present here. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of DME Media School, who has created this platform for all of us to get together for this international conference, ICANN 3, which is being appraised from last 2 years in association with Deakin University, Melbourne, Australia. Deakin University has established in 1974 in, in Melbourne, Australia. They are ranked 5-star for world-class facilities, research and teaching, as well as employability, innovation, and inclusiveness. Our knowledge partners are Adamas University, Kolkata, KR Mangalam University, Haryana, APJ Institute of Mass Communication, and Public Relations Society of India, Delhi chapter. And all these names are popularly known for their works and recognitions in their field. And our media partner, the Policy Times, People's Voice for Policy Change. ICANN 3 is being organized by the most promising DME Media School, the Delhi Metropolitan Education, which is affiliated to Guru Gobind Singh Indraprasth University, approved by Bar Council of India. You can also follow and like our ICANN 3 social media, Facebook and Instagram pages, and keep getting all the updates. All the sessions are available on ICANN 3 Facebook page and ICANN 3 playlist on YouTube DME TV channel. Also, ICANN 3 is LinkedIn, where there are 400 plus connections, all researchers, academic VCs, deans, HODs from universities and colleges of India and abroad. Make sure to connect on ICANN 3 LinkedIn page, a great place for networking and building a community for academic excellence and adding values on the earth we live in. Before beginning, I would like Yashashvika ma'am to please inform us about the conference.
Thank you, Kanishk. Hello, everyone. I, Yashasvika Yadav, welcome you to the third edition of ICANN, which is titled as Issues of Community, Agenda and News, which is being hosted by Most Promising Media Institute of India, DME Media School. It is the world's first 10-day digital live international conference being held from June 21st to June 30th, 2020. We have total 28 sessions, which includes 14 technical sessions, 3 panel discussions, 3 plenary sessions, and 4 masterclasses. It gives me immense pleasure to announce that we have this year received 203 abstracts and 141 papers have been published and have conceptualized 6 books, 5 English and 1 Hindi, wherein 174 authors have contributed. All books are available on Amazon, and Ritvik sir has shared with you the links. Ritvik sir, would you like to play the digital release of the books? Thank you. The links as informed is available in the chat box. We are thankful to our knowledge partners, Adamas University, Kolkata, KR Mangalam University, Gurugram, APJ Institute of Mass Communication, New Delhi, Public Relations Society of India, PRSI, Delhi chapter, and our media partner for the conference is the Policy Times. Thank you. This is the third edition of ICANN. The first edition, India and Changing Aspects of News, was organized in March 2018. And the second edition, Indian Cinema and Alternate Networks, was held in November 2018. ICANN 3 is being organized by Delhi Metropolitan Education, which is a A-grade premier educational institute affiliated to Guru Gobind Singh Indraprasth University, New Delhi, approved by Bar Council India. Apart from BJMC, we are also offering BBA, BALLB, BBLLB with BCI approval. DME believes in imparting world-class education to its students while training them to develop and enhance their skills. This education and training enables them in taking up challenges of the industry and creating a space of themselves with their competence and vigor. As informed by Kumar Kanishk, you can follow all the details on our Facebook handle and social media handles, which has also been shared by Ritvik sir. Also, I would like to thank Dr. Anubhuti Yadav for sparing time to join the session. I would also like to inform we have amongst us Dr. Amrit Saxena, Dean DMA Media School, and Dr. Susmita Wala, HOD DMA Media School. Thank you, sir and ma'am. I would request you to please say a few words, although you already said a lot, but still you.
So there is nothing much to be said. We wish that the session starts fast and the presenters get time to make their presentation. I welcome Dr. Anubhuti Yadav to be in this session, and it's really a pleasure that and the presentations are happening with her, and we will be able to get her guidance and her expertise in the area in which the papers are being presented. So over to Yashaswika.
Over to you, Kumar Kanishk. Please continue.
Thank you, ma'am. So the theme of the session is media content, news analysis, and ethical issues. And as we can see that we have number of participants and scholars across the globe to give their views and enlighten us on this topic. We are obliged with her presence, and it's our honor to have with us Dr. Anubhuti Yadav as our chairperson for this session. Professor Anubhuti Yadav is head of Department of New Media and course director of Advertising and Public Relations course, Indian Institute of Mass Communication. She is also holding the responsibility of Dean Student Welfare. She is member of Executive Council and the Academic Council. She also held charge as the course director of English Journalism course for the academic year 2017 to 18. Dr. Yadav comes with more than 15 years of experience in teaching and research. She started her career with an advertising agency in 2000 and worked on prestigious campaigns like Rajasthan Tourism. Later, she moved to academics and joined IIMC and taught advertising and research for 3 years. She joined National Council of Education, Research and Training, NCERT, in 2006 to work in areas like educational media, educational technology, new media, and media literacy. Her work in the area of educational media won her 4 national awards as Best Scriptwriter and Researcher for the series on Women Achievers, Paramveer Chakra awardees, and media literacy. She is a leading expert and an active promoter of media literacy in India. She undertook various projects to promote digital and media literacy education in India. She played a key role in launch of National Repository of Open Educational Resources, the project she coordinated for Ministry of Human Resource and Development. The project was mentioned in the highlights of achievements of the Ministry of Human Resource Development in 2014. She is advising Facebook on their digital literacy project and working closely with Google on their Google News Initiative training network in India. She is certified trainer on fact checking and verification. She has conducted workshops on fact checking and verification for the journalists, media educators, and media students. She is also member of Technical Committee on Pradhan Mantri Digital Sakshakti Abhiyan. She is an advisor to Media Ownership Monitor India project, an initiative by Reporters Without Border to map ownership pattern in media industry across the globe. She is the co-author of an Indian edition of Media Literacy, Key to Interpreting Media Messages, book developed under Digital International Media Literacy Project. She is currently working on a book on new media journalism. Professor Yadav was jury member of various festivals and awards like Woodpecker Film Festival, National Science Film Festival, Prakriti Festival, CEC, MHRD, and Kaleido Award organized by the brand equity ET. She has received
Okay,
innovative
I
use.
think it's I mean lot. What we can do is we can start with the presentations because I'm sure that the scholars might be waiting to
Yeah.
present their research papers. I just want to know like how many presentations are there, Yashasvika, and how much time are we giving to each presenter? Just unmute yourself.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We, as of now, ma'am, we have 8 presentations, and we are giving 5 minutes for presentation and 5 minutes for Q&A session.
Okay, okay,
Yes,
okay,
ma'am.
right.
So
So
shall
maybe what we can do
yes,
is
ma'am.
that after each presentation, we can maybe like if I have to ask question, I can ask question, and if we see any question in the chat box, we can take those questions and like we can ask the scholar.
Definitely,
Right.
ma'am. That has been familiarized. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So what we can do is we can start with the presentation, but before that, I would like to compliment Professor Saxena and Professor Bala for putting this together. This is really a great achievement, at the time of this COVID and pandemic, if we are able to organize international conference and that too with the participants, like there are around 73 to 75 participants. So when we have, such conferences, otherwise in the technical sessions, you don't see more than, around 15 to 20 participants. So it's a great achievement to see so many people, participating in this. So now we can start with the presentations. You can call the first presenter.
Sure, ma'am. Sure. I'll do that. First is disinformation as a tool of statecraft and destabilization. Krishna Pandey, ma'am, DMA Media School, Delhi Metropolitan Education, Noida, Delhi NCR. Second, we have Mr. Shiv Dhawan. Please be ready with your presentation. Ma'am, you may start, Krishna, ma'am.
Thank you, Yashasvika. Good evening, Anubhuti ma'am. Good evening, Amrish sir. Good evening, Bala ma'am. The topic of my paper is disinformation as a tool of statecraft and destabilization. Disinformation, defined as false information intended to mislead, especially in the form of propaganda by governments, has been an integral part of statecraft even before the emergence of the concept of modern state. If one goes by various researches conducted world over on this subject in particular, there is one study which is prepared by Rand Kopp, which is titled as An Annotated Bibliography of the Open Literature on Deception, which cites nearly 1,000 works only on deception from China alone, as early as 2,500 years ago till modern times. So my paper tries to analyze how governments across the world have used disinformation to further their gains through vested interests in the form of either territorial expansion or simply to deceive and get at the helm of power. The study which I followed is qualitative by nature and follows oral history approach. Oral history approach in research is used for data collection, especially in quantitative, but in qualitative study, this approach is also used to study and analyze perceptions, experiences, events, or to gather data on historical knowledge. The aim to write this paper was to find out how disinformation has played history, how the major historical events were shaped based on disinformation, and how disinformation played a major role in monopolizing power. In this context, I have followed landmark events that have shaped the history of mankind and how disinformation has been used as a tool behind the shaping of these events. So my study spans from as early as to 44 BC, when Mark Antony took over as the reign of Roman Empire. And in that, I have also included in how Julius Caesar's son used a false document of it's called as the will of Mark Antony, a false document to throw him out of power and discredit him in the Roman Empire. So I have also included subsequent landmark events in the history of mankind, like French Revolution. How we all know that the high-handed attitude of Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France, that led to the French Revolution. Her statement, "If not bread, give them cake," was the final nail in the coffin of the simmering discontent among the people of France. This is what we have studied so far. However, not many people know that one of the main reasons that led to the rising discontent among the commoners, and especially the peasants, was a very strong rumor that was circulated before the French Revolution that the king was trying to come up with a law which would deprive villagers of their land. Although the king had no such intention, but such kind of rumor did fuel public anger against the royalty. So coming to us from the ancient to modern, now I have also taken examples of Nazi, how under Hitler, propaganda and disinformation was not just an instrument, but it was the very medium of government itself. So here we have also taken, I've also taken Second World War, and again one very small fact that we all are very much aware, that the final invasion of Poland led to the Second World War, but actually it was not the real thing. The real issue was again an issue of fake news and disinformation, whereby the bodies of the inmates of one of the concentration camps were filled with, were stuffed into German uniforms, and they were riddled with bullets and were thrown near one of the concentration camps in bordering Poland and Germany, which triggered the World War II. Now, before that, we also see various events like the rise of Bolsheviks in Russia. I mean, they were so much smart in mastering the art of disinformation that you would say that it was in Russian, it was called as desinformatia. Soviets were the masters of art of disinformation. They adopted a tactic called show trial, especially during Stalin's regime. And in this show trial, people would be surprised to know that victim was forced falsely to condemn himself to death in such a convincing manner that press would accept it as a truth, and people would also acknowledge it as a true story, and they would follow it accordingly. So while following these events, I also started thinking about what were the Britishers and Americans doing at that time. So even Britishers and Americans could not lag behind in the theory of disinformation, especially when we see 1924 elections, when Labour government lost the elections only simply because there was a letter floated in the media of Labour supporting the communists. So that led to the fall of the Labour government in 1924. Americans were far, far ahead in the theory of disinformation. The first most important campaign that the Americans were following was the Mockingbird, which started by CIA to plant intelligence reports among reporters at more than 25 major newspapers and wire agencies, who would then forward them and make people aware of how then they would spread, and the people were simply oblivious of the fact that they were being fed by the government propaganda. Not only this, in fact, newspapers like the Washington Post, the New York Times, and also the CNN, which is now the forerunner of pointing out fake news of Donald Trump, once were used as a weapon or as a vehicle by subsequent governments like that of Lyndon Johnson to spread disinformation. People would be surprised, the war of Vietnam, which was based on disinformation. The Washington Post and the New York Times were reporting that the government, that American government had launched a war against North Vietnam because they were being attacked by the Vietnamese forces in the Gulf of Tonkin. Although this was not the case, there was no such attack had taken place. Nothing was happened, but the American government just needed to topple the government at North Vietnam. So we have so many such instances whereby disinformation has become a tool of the statecraft. Now coming to India. Well, Indians were never
Krishna
behind.
ma'am, sorry to intervene, 5 minutes are over.
Okay.
Yes,
I'll wait for the questions.
any questions from anyone? Anubhuti ma'am, please unmute yourself, ma'am. Anubhuti ma'am, please unmute yourself.
To share her, experiences of the India, because she started with that, and then we can take 1 or 2 questions.
Oh, all right, ma'am.
Krishna, please go ahead.
Okay, ma'am, coming to India, well, I started with Chanakya Niti of Arthashastra, where he speaks about four types of war. The first is Mantra Yuddha, the second is where there's a war of mind. Then Prakasa Yuddha, that's an open direct confrontation. Then he talks about Kutal Yuddha, which is concealed war. And then he talks about Guda Yuddha, which is like covert clandestine war. So we see this Kutal Yuddha and Guda Yuddha as the two mechanisms which are still being followed by the by various governments. And you would be surprised that the 1857 revolt or War of Independence, to be very specific, was based on, as we know, was based on newly introduced Enfield rifles, which were said to be soaked with cow and pig's fat, that instigated both Hindu and Muslim soldiers of the East India Company. But there is one more lesser known fact, which is again disinformation, and not many people know about it, and it is not being recorded also very much. It is called the Chapati movement, and this started months before the outbreak of mutiny. You know, chapatis were clandestinely distributed to various villages with a lot of rumors, which said some rumors were like that these chapatis were laced with cow bones to make Hindus impure, or some people somewhere the rumor was spread that these were often carried by chowkidars who were generally of lower caste, and this meant to denigrate the higher caste Hindus. In fact, Chapati movement was the one which created a lot of anger against the British in the rural areas. So even when we talk about the post-independent India, the only time an army regiment revolted was the result of a false rumor. Again, disinformation played a very big role in this. That was post Operation Blue Star. A rumor gained currency among the soldiers of Sikh regiment headquartered at Ramgarh, which is now in Jharkhand, and this resulted in a revolt and killing of their commanding officer, which was at the rank of brigadier.
Okay, okay. Right now, Krishna, now we have to give some time to others so that they can ask questions.
Yes,
So,
ma'am.
like after listening to you, I mean, what I could get was that basically, in your research, what you did was one, you wanted to make a point that, we talk about disinformation, misinformation, fake news a lot nowadays, but it's not a recent phenomena. Like this is something which has been like there for
Which
ages,
has been
right?
used by various governments to further their interests.
Okay. So, like, were there any comparative analysis of, like the cases which you have taken of the different countries? And can you tell us, like, from where, which side of the world, a lot of disinformation is coming, or maybe like the governments are involved in this?
In fact, if you see in modern times, disinformation has also been used as a tool by various governments in modern times, specifically government of Egypt, which is where the Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, he is the president. Now, what he has done is, in the name of anti-cyber information technology crimes law, he has come up with this law by which he is crushing the dissent to the government. Not only this, we get the Malaysian government has again passed anti-fake news bill. This new law which aims at protecting the people from fake news. Now this covers all form of publishing which comes on the social media. So anybody who is violating any kind of this thing will get a minimum of 6 years of jail. So it is not
Okay.
just that there are many modern government of Belarus, Kenya, I mean Indonesia. They are all doing it to in a way to crush dissent. Whosoever is coming out and talking against the government. We
Okay,
have seen
thank
the
you,
cases.
Krishna. We've got one similar question from one of the participant, Akriti Taneja, and she is asking that she wants to inquire about the contextualization of disinformation in the current scenario in India from the perspective of the current government.
Yeah, see, first of all, we have to understand disinformation is also a part of fake news. And about the current government, what I can say is that though there is a lot of speculation that the government lies and hides a lot of information, the recent Indo-China the skirmishes that have happened in the border, there have been a lot of opposition parties coming up and talking and saying that the government, the prime minister has used certain terminologies, which is a way of disinformation. In fact, Manmohan Singh's recent statement itself talks about disinformation as a way of fighting information by the government. So, disinformation, we cannot keep it separate from fake news per se. Fake news is a normal terminology which talks about, in a academic sense, in a theoretical sense, it's a lack of truth and a lack of truthfulness. Disinformation is, again, you are hiding through deceit, you are lying, and you are not telling the truth, or you are giving half truth. So whatever the current government is doing right now is, we can call it as a form of disinformation. But the thing is, there is no as such proof which can, through which, or evidences which can tell that okay, what the government is doing is outrightly lying or anything. Probably once this government goes, the new government comes and it tries to investigate, we would come about more information on this. This is what I feel.
Anubhuti ma'am got disconnected. She got disconnected. I'll coordinate with her. Meanwhile, ma'am, I just want to know what is the difference between disinformation and misinformation.
Yeah.
I've been very confused with these two terminologies.
See, disinformation is deceptive information, rumors, half truths, big lies, and misinformation is giving wrong information.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
I think, Yashaswika, we should move ahead to the
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Krishna, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Next, we have with us Paid News and Propaganda in Digital Media, a survey study, Mr. Shiv Dhawan, DME Media School, Delhi Metropolitan Education. Shiv is a student in our college.
Good afternoon to everyone. Firstly, I would like to ask for screen sharing access.
Yes. Ritik sir, can you please provide screen sharing access to Shiv? I would request everyone else to please mute themselves. After Shiv, we have Mr. Ritvik Ghosh. So please be prepared after this.
Okay, so I'll start my presentation. My topic is paid news and propaganda in digital media. It's a very simple study. It's a survey study with objectives of research. Like, I had to find out the most preferred news channel amongst the youth of the country. I've taken 100 journalism students as a sample size. Students who are between the age of 17 to 25, students who are currently pursuing journalism or are planning to pursue journalism, or students who are graduate in this field. And so basically what I tried to find was the percentage of youth who can identify fake news and paid news, and who know the difference between disinformation, misinformation, and the people who check that this is fake news, or who check facts on different websites. So this was my main motive of research. So this is, in my questionnaire, the first question, one of the first questions which I asked was, which is the most preferred news channel which you watch? Because I wanted to get a better idea of what the youth of the country is watching, what budding, aspiring journalists of the country are watching. So you can see the stats on your screen. I guess you can see them. So Zee News is the most preferred. I have only included Hindi news channels because had I included English news channels, there would have been a wide array of topics to cover. So I've only included Hindi news channels. Zee News is the most preferred news channels amongst the youth. So this displays what the youth is watching and what type of content they want to watch. So I have another subsequent question following up from what news channel they are watching, and that is, what for do you watch the content? Like, do you watch it for the anchor, or do you watch it just for facts and content? So most people watch the watch news shows for, just a moment, let me, yeah. So on what basis do they select their preferred news channels? So most people select their preferred news channels on the basis of content, and not a lot of, only 12% of the people actually select their preferred news channels on the basis of their anchor, whoever the anchor is. So now, what does the youth think? How does propaganda in media spread? So in my opinion, in digital media, after doing this research, what I found out on a personal basis is that the youth of the country, they know journalism students, they have an idea about which news channel has an inclination towards which political party. And I had a related question to this. So this is a question like, in your opinion, which is the most credible channel? So another Z News has been voted, 30% of the votes have gone to Z News. So in my opinion, the students, current journalism students, they don't watch a lot of news channels. They don't watch a lot of different channels. They just stick to one channel and they just watch it all over again. And they have basic shows which they want to explore. Like one question in my questionnaire said, which is the one show which you watch the most on news channels? And the prime time show was voted by 44% of the people. So basically my study, the main aim of my study was to find out if what channels they are watching. And then there was this question in my questionnaire where I asked the participants about fact checking, about if they check the facts. So here it is, only 44% of the total participants only check the facts sometimes, and 25% participants never check or cross-check facts and figures which are shown on news channel, which shows the state of viewers and readers in this country. And these, let me remind you, these are journalism students who do not check facts and figures. So you can have an idea that the common man, how much they check about these facts and figures. So that's about it. In my opinion, I believe that this propaganda, all this misinformation and disinformation, the spread of this is mainly because of our of the viewers, because we do not believe to cross-check and check the facts.
Okay, are we done with your presentation, Shiv?
Yes, ma'am.
Can we proceed with the questions?
Yeah.
Anubhuti ma'am, would you like to ask him? Ma'am, please unmute yourself. Anubhuti ma'am. Anubhuti ma'am, please unmute.
Shiv, when you said that, your presentation is about, paid media and propaganda, I was actually expecting something else. But right now, when you showed your presentation, it's more of, the media habits of, journalism students, what are they watching and, which is the credible source of news for them. So somewhere, that thing is lacking, because you started with a very nice topic and I was hoping something good will come out of it. But yes, having said that, this is also a good piece of information wherein you're, and one point which you made out, it's really nice, wherein you said that 64% of the students, they said that they do check, fact check the content or cross check or verify the content which they are consuming, and 25% of them, they said that they never do that, right? I just have one question from you. Those who have said that yes, they try and verify the content which they consume from all these news channels, did you ask them how do they do that? Do they have those skills to fact check?
Yes, ma'am. In my questionnaire, this was the next question where I asked how do they cross-check the contents, and 82% of them said that they cross-check the contents on online websites. They now that Google has introduced this fact-checking system upon themselves, and now they have also included this system where you can check fact-check images. Just today, I was reading this news about Google having these images where you can fact-check. Now they have also, Google also has this fact check API. So most of the people check from there.
Okay. Yashasvika, you can take more questions from this.
Yeah. So we have two questions from Akriti. The question is, first question is, Shiv, as your title suggests, digital media, while your paper is restricted to TV news channels. How do you justify that?
I would agree that the title was a little misleading, because I wanted, the study was basically, I wanted the study to aim at news channels because of the current condition of Indian news channels and newsrooms, because the current condition, all of us know about the inclination news channels have towards, inclination and favoritism news channels have towards a political party. That is why I wanted my research to focus on that. I agree with whoever has asked the question. I agree with them. The title was a little misleading.
Okay. And the second question from again Akriti Taneja is, how did you come to the conclusion of paid news and propaganda through your research study? Also, what do you think is the future scope of your study?
See, my research, paid news and propaganda, I also asked the students what channels they think favor or are inclined towards a certain political party. And I also had questions about the 2009 elections or 2014 elections, although I did not include them in my research because of the lack of time. But a future research scope of my study is that in the coming generations, I took 100 journalism students in my survey. So in the coming time, you would maybe see 50 of them, you would see them in newsrooms, or you would see even more than that in newsrooms. And when these current batch are, when the current batch is not, like if they are inclined towards a certain news channel, you can just guess the condition of journalism in the upcoming years. That was the scope of my research.
And how did you choose this sample? I mean, where did you choose these 100 students from? Is it from which college? Where did you choose it from?
I have chosen it from Delhi NCR only, colleges in Delhi NCR.
Okay, there's one more question, Shiv. This is, don't you think journalism students watch more news online as compared to electronic media? The favoritism of channel is least when it comes to digital world.
Uh, Firstly, I wouldn't agree on this that the favoritism is least when it comes to the digital world, because although I'm no one to judge the favoritism, but I do believe that all of us have different choices. All journalism students have different choices. Some may read newspapers to give themselves information. Some may go online and watch channels online. Some may be inclined towards watching it on television. But I think favoritism lies in every aspect of media, and that is why I don't agree with this point that if you watch digital media or if you watch online media, online news, there would be lack of favoritism. I just believe that you always have to do fact checking after whatever you read, and fact checking websites are where you can do this.
I just want to say one thing. See, when you go out to 100 respondents, I mean, that's a good sample size, right?
Yeah.
And, going to 100 respondents, getting your questionnaire filled, it's a huge task. But when you go to them, one is that you need to have a clarity, what exactly your research problem is and what exactly do you want to find out through this particular research. And this is one part which is missing in your, in your presentation, maybe like because of the paucity of time, you were not able to, share the entire thing, but that paid news is something which is not there at all in your presentation. So maybe the next time you can keep this thing in mind. So whenever you're sharing that these are the objectives, keep in mind that, you have to show like how those objectives were fulfilled through your research. Thank you. So we can move to the next presentation.
Yes, ma'am. Next we have Mr. Ritvik Ghosh. His topic is fake news identification, study of media students of DME. He's from DME Media School.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, Amrit sir. Good evening, Shushmita ma'am. So I'd like to start with a presentation. So it's basically like what happens is like we're facing a lot of challenges regarding fake news, and our students, the media students, they are going to be the flag bearers of the media, handling the media, the next generation journalists, the media professionals. So it is very important for them to be, worthy in handling this situation and, tackling fake news. So it's on the basis of that I, decided to go in for this small research work. Which is like the importance of media literacy and information literacy with special reference to undergraduate media students and teachers of Delhi NCR. So, well, I could not cover the entire, the sample of different media institutes of Delhi NCR, but I chose Delhi Metropolitan Education and KR Mangalam University, since I'm pursuing my PhD from KR Mangalam University. So the purpose of this study was to provide insight into students' fake news judgment and importance of teaching digital media literacy and information literacy, not as an option, but as a core educational requirement in media studies, which I find is missing at the moment. And it is very, very important to address this particular subject. Then just to discuss the background, fake news, the term was basically coined in 2016, elections happened in the US, and there was a lot of misappropriation with the information that was being disseminated. And that is, the colloquial term, the fake news. This term was coined then, and which found its way into the dictionary in 2017. So now the purpose is like, there are several motives behind creating fake news. One is like political agenda or agitprop, which we can say. Like if we draw back its history, Mussolini did it in a great way. He had 7 newspapers wherein he was, it was all meant for propaganda and agitprop. And then we have the money making, like clickbait. That is also one of the causes of creating fake news. So it's very tempting, and people go and click on those links, and that's how these people make money. And then of course spreading hate, or some people just do it for fun, or time pass, and just things like that, like they have nothing to do, okay, let's do something, and they would just try to create some fake information, put it across. And now this is also working as an organized business activities. Like this corporates and a lot of these sectors, like big industrial sectors are adopting this to defame their competitor companies and promote themselves. So this is also one of the things that is happening, and especially it's happening in a very big way in China. They are having, like like you have these call centers and all. So they are having it's like an organized, like you have a center for this. They're running a center wherein this sort of fake news activity is being being practiced. Like maybe there's this one employee, he's handling some 10 mobile phones which are like constantly plugged into the charger, and all the time he's busy putting in these fake tweets and fake information over the social media platforms. So well, this is just to put the background in terms of what fake news is. And of course the definition has been changing from time to time, and now it is basically like anything which is not correct information is being bracketed into this term called fake news. So just to take it forward, it is seen that people adopt technology easily, right? So technology always fascinates people. So now what happens is, like when people are fascinated towards it, they're glued also towards it. And this is exactly how these mobile phones, internet found its place. So even in, if you see the rural people who don't know how to read, write, or things like that, even these domestic helps, when they come home, they hardly their literacy level is pretty low, but you see they are pretty active on their mobile phones, not on text content, but a lot of pictures and videos. So they interact with that type of content. So now we are facing a challenge wherein, do you see, it's like more than now 3 million rural Indians, they are already into using the internet and mobile phones, and as compared to some 350 million urban counterparts, right? So and it's growing by the day. So what is happening now is, like, this is actually a challenge wherein people who are not literate enough to understand what is a balanced piece of information, or their sense of judgment to actually judge a piece of information which they're going through or seeing or reading. So they are like high chances of getting misled. So that's one of the major challenges we are facing now. And
Ritvik sir, sorry to intervene. Your
yeah,
5 minutes are over.
is it?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so I'll just quickly brush through. Like, so medium is basically the message, that's in theory, and whatever mediums are, like, people think like if it's on the internet, so it must be true. So that is like the basic perception of people. Then the object of my study is to find out whether the students and teachers are able to identify fake news content on WhatsApp and Facebook. Then this is how it inspired me to take this research forward. Then my research design basically included I designed a questionnaire comprising of around 25 questions and 15 pictures, and that is what I used for my survey. And I had like 110 student respondents and
You know,
about
since
50.
we do not have that much of time, can we straight away come on to your findings, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you.
So the finding is basically none of the media teachers or students could accurately uh, find out, the exact fake content, right? So they were not able to identify it 100%. So that means that this education is very much required to make the students and the media teachers, like they need this training. So it has to be formally introduced. So that's about it. So that's the conclusion. And well, I would like to thank my supervisor, Dr. Manasvi Maheshwari, and my co-supervisor, Professor Ambrish Saxena, for guiding me. And thank you all very much.
Thank you. I just have one question before we take questions from other participants.
Yes.
What do you understand by media literacy? Like when we say
Media literacy. Yes, so media literacy is basically like a lot of media is there, different, like there are a lot of content on the various channels, right? So it's basically a sender to the receiver, what content is flowing and through what channel. So when I am talking about the digital platform, right? So there are a number of channel and various different type of media, like you have the pictures, you have the videos, you have the text, you have the voice, and like a lot of manipulations take place. So it's basically that to understand the entire content, the media, so and information, how it flows, right? So how the information flows, the interactivity and perception level, and then it is further transferred or conveyed to the others.
Yeah,
So
there
the
are a few
entire
things. Say,
process.
for example, when we talk about media literacy, it's an ability to access, analyze, evaluate, construct information in a wide variety of forms. You know, this is the basic definition of media literacy, right? There are a number of things have been added to it. Now, for example, if I take one part of it, access, right? What did you have in your questionnaire to say that the media educators or journalism students are not media and information literate?
Ma'am, basically what happened is like I had these 15 fake news pictures which I gave to identify. So none could actually identify accurately all the 15. Some were like 8, 10, 12, but nobody could identify 100%. Then I also studied their behavioral like tendencies of using WhatsApp, how many times they forward those WhatsApp messages, and whether they believe in it or not.
You might have
And
asked them a question like, what is the source of this information?
yes, of course, the source and whether
That's
they
the access
verify
part.
or not, whether they verify it or not, or they simply forward it or start believing in it. So
Okay.
all these
Yashasvika,
questions
we
are
can
there.
take other questions.
Yes,
Right.
yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Yes, ma'am. So there's this question from Akriti ma'am again. So she's asking, I would like to ask about how do you define media and information literacy and its competencies to make this conclusion?
Well, as I said, that media literacy is basically uh, how well you are able to handle media, you are able to understand media, okay, the way it propagates, the way it is disseminated, the way it is in like people receive it, and then they interpret it. So this is very important, and of course there are like this is the entire thing is flowing through a channel, right? So how they basically they have an understanding of this under the entire channel. Where could be the flaws, where could there be gatekeeping, where could there be people adding extra information to it, or cutting out several pieces of information from that pure piece of information, or how it is manipulated. So all these things, it's very important to understand that. I mean, that's where it falls under.
Kriti ma'am has another question
Yes.
related to, did you have cross-checking question in your survey questionnaire to come to this conclusion, assessing the
Yes,
four
yes, I did have.
competencies of media literacy, sir?
Yes, very much. I had the questions wherein I took the feedback, and that was cross-verified with the 15 fake news pictures that I had put. Right. So it cross-verified the two. I had the questions, and then I had the pictures to identify it, and thus there was this conclusion after comparing the two.
Okay, thank you.
I think we should
Thank you
move
so
on to
much.
the next slide.
Yeah.
We have Deepika Dhawan next from Delhi Metropolitan Education. Her topic is the evolution of news consumption, sensory journalism, and Generation Z.
Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
Jessica, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I like to share my screen. So please give access.
Yes, you have access.
Okay. Right. Right. So my topic is evolution of news consumption, sensory journalism, and Gen Z. I chose this topic out of curiosity, or how I saw the students all the time on their phones, the increasing inclination towards Snapchat, and how they were still, without using the traditional medium, they were still very much updated. Right. So I'm focused on two major things here, called sensory journalism and Gen Z. So first I'll explain what is sensory journalism. It involves all dissemination of news via social media platforms, 3D, virtual reality, mixed reality, augmented reality, and all forms of sensory journalism. Dissemination of news on technologically updated platforms pertaining to and involving any of the physical senses, where your senses are being involved, where you can see, where you can experience it, where you can engage yourself. This is a chart that shows this is a recent it's of last year by Pew Research Center, which shows Generation Z are the people born from 1997 to 2012. This is the generation that I have focused in my study. So Generation Z, all this research is based on secondary resources. It's a case study research, and my research study is, so Generation Z, as you can see on your screen, is they consider social media as their number one and number two most important news resource. They rank engagement and interaction as the two most important characteristics of journalism, where they can, talk back, where they can comment and engage. They are very comfortable with news being disseminated via social media platforms, and they value visual format in journalism more than anything else. And also, they don't want to spend so much time reading a long article, lengthy article, be it op-ed, be it anything. So that this is these are their general news consumption inclinations. Right. So this paper aims to elaborate and answer two important questions here. Is sensory journalism becoming a newer and normal way of receiving news? And what has Gen Z to do with it? So based on what I have experienced while I researched and wrote the paper, is we are in kind of a transitional phase where we haven't left the traditional or a mainstream sources like TV, print, radio, but we are not totally totally dependent on sensory journalism or on experiential way of getting the news. So this is a collective case study approach research, wherein the researcher selects multiple case studies to illustrate their issue. it's for the data collection, I took a wide array of secondary research sources such as news articles, research research papers, research studies done by different organizations, and audio-visual materials, and the websites of big traditional media organizations also. The two media platforms I have chosen for this case study is Snapchat and immersive technologies. We'll talk about that. So, introducing, social media has become the primary source of news consumption online with more than 2.4 billion internet users, and most of them are alerted via breaking news. And here you can see I have defined what is sensory, what is immersive, what is interactive, and what is spatial for your reference, because all these four terms are somewhere interrelated, but they are still different when we talk about them. Now, what the image that you see is, one is, these are head-worn displays. So the left one, the A, covers, you know, it also covers your peripheral vision, but the Google Cardboard one, the and Aura VR, they leave the peripheral vision. So here, immersive journalism is defined as the production of news in a form of in which people can gain first-person experiences. And spatial journalism incorporates space, place, or location, so physical, augmented, and virtual reality into the process and practice of journalism. Now, the problem with not the problems, I would say challenges would be with spatial journalism would be technical limitations, long production hours, and they need highly compatible technology. So that's why right now they are not used, these technologies are not used for very objective or very immediate things. They are mostly used for feature stories. Like I'm going to show you this. So this is an augmented reality thing done by New York Times. What they did was on the website, they showed how Mars, so you can scroll and it keeps changing, you can interact with the whole thing. The next is Times exclusive investigative journalism thing going on the rainforest fire, which happened, the Amazon fire. This is the third example which I came across. This is
Deepika ma'am, sorry to intervene. 5 minutes are over. We can
just
move
take
on.
30 seconds more, ma'am.
Okay.
So this is a website for Haiti. So they how they showed the challenges, the decision making of the town. Traditional news organizations are also coming to Snapchat. So these are the screenshots. I would like to specifically say finding news is very easy on Snapchat. I don't really need newspaper articles anymore. This is a school senior student. These are Snapchat. So these are part of Discover Stories. My Story, Live Story, Discover Stories. Discover Stories stay for 24 hours only, and they're used by these traditional media sources, organizations to disseminate stories. The second was immersive technologies. Immersive technologies, the concepts were already talked about in 1995 and so, and they have already rarely, but they had done something to recreate, for example, the 1968 student revolt at that time. Here is an example of mixed reality on weather forecast on the Weather Channel. This is an AR experience by NY Times. This is by Hardy and McMahon. This is a summary of each type of immersive journalism specifically. So they range from 360-degree videos to mobile immersive public service, which are head-worn. Then there's CG, which is computer graphic-based immersive investigations and immersive explanatory reports. So these are for different. So this is a proper theory-based research that they came upon. This is the analysis: increased usage, because with increasing consumerism, with increasing usage of technology, obviously then consumption of news via this will increase. Second, human impact and empathy. When you are immersed in a certain story, for example, a rape or a war or a bomb blast happening, obviously the viewer's level of empathy will increase. The impact of it will increase, and it might bring some changes in the overall situation. The third being increasing opportunities and challenges. challenges for journalists. They need to be, so here with this technology, sorry Yashasika ma'am, a little more, I'm just almost done. Right, so with this, the role of journalist is going to change. They will not just be there to report the news what happened and this is just done by technology. The role of journalist will change. The editors will role will change. They will be required for bias reduction, to filter out the useless news. They also have to be prepared for democratization of news. They also have to be on the lookout for wrong news or fake news. What we all are discussing about misinformation, disinformation, right? And there's modification of perspectives, the use of ethics. So journalist itself role will change, it will evolve. So how I interpret is, this is going to be the new normal of getting the news. So journalists and all the media people should be ready for this change. They should be hands-on. They should be very much fluid with the implementation of such technologies. Now, Generation Z is the reason. So my question, the question that I had in the beginning is, Generation Z is it directly related to these technologies being used more? Or yes, because they are the ones who are the early adopters, who want this kind of thing. They demand experiences and they are early adopters. Thank you. None.
Okay, thank you, Deepika. I mean, this is an interesting study. I just have one question from you. Say, for example, you talked about, readiness among, this particular generation to use this particular technology. I just want to ask you one question that, as far as the Indian news media industry is concerned, do you think that they're ready for this new technology? Because the kind of cases which you have shared with us is mostly coming from the international media platforms. One is that, and second is, like, if the media industry is ready, do you think that our audience is ready? Because, like, for many of these things, they also require, certain technology at hand to, experience those particular news stories.
Right. This has been done in the Indian context also. I couldn't get the picture, but I read it somewhere that some Indian news channel has also done this weather thing, wherein it's showing maybe earthquake is happening or there's a thunderstorm happening in the newsroom itself. So it is beginning to be, but it will take a lot of time given our digital divide that we know in our country right now. Also we are facing, but yes, this is possible given investment, and but it's a huge thing and it will take time. But as we have seen in the past decade or so, that whatever Western world does, India automatically starts implementing it quickly.
Okay. Any other question?
We don't have any question, ma'am. Deepika ma'am, you spoke about democratization of communication. So don't you think this fake news, disinformation, misinformation and all is being caused by democratization of communication?
Yeah, it is. User-generated content, yes.
So,
So everything has its pros and cons. So that's why I said the journalist role will change, is changing slowly. Now they have to be on. Now they have to look at the minimization of such news, wherein people are being misdirected, rather than just transferring news from one place to another.
Okay. And what do you feel will be the media ecosystem once this is introduced, sensory journalism?
As we know, it's obviously we are moving towards less labor intensive industries. We are looking at AI. Obviously it's really far away, 10, 15, 20, 50 years. We don't know how it is going to be, but then it is going to change. It will be technologically intensive, but the journalist requirement, the importance of journalists will increase way beyond that we can imagine. This is what I've understood, at least.
Do you think that the journalists are trained enough to use all these technologies right now, if we talk about Indian media industry?
I do not think so much, because ma'am, it requires investment by the media organizations, and it requires training. So that requires resources.
Okay.
We should move on to the next presentation. I'm not sure if we have Dr. Aanchal Sehgal with us. She had some internet connectivity. Meanwhile, we can start with Mohammad Kamil. His fake news as an instrument of political promulgation, sorry, a contextual analysis of Delhi Assembly election 2020. He's from DME Media School.
Sir, please unmute me.
You're unmuted, sir.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I don't have a PPT presentation, but I will give a oral presentation on my topic. So, good evening, everyone. Respected chairperson, co-chair, dean sir, HOD ma'am, and my dear colleagues. I'm Mohammad Kamil, assistant professor, DME Media School. Will talk about my paper on fake news as an instrument of political promulgation. It is basically a contextual analysis on Delhi Assembly polls that held in 2020 in the month of Feb only. So with such a limited time, I'm not going to talk much about fake news, but rather I will focus on the issues that have emerged in wake of fake news and the usage of fake news as an instrument or a tool, to gain some benefits or some profit. But when we talk about politics, profit could be in terms of earning votes or to turn out things in our favor. But as we all know, and it is rightly said by Krishna ma'am, that fake news has been used since ages to cover so many things, but it has always been used to attract a target audience, and it is an old phenomena, either in terms of to gain trust or to bring people on a common platform. But with the advancement of technology, what we are seeing it that major changes have happened in terms of both the content generation and the dissemination, and it has strengthened fake news, which is penetrating deep with severe consequences. And politics is also such field which is adopting fake news and misinformation very in a very fast manner, and it is being used at very personal level. So as rightly said by Ritvik sir, the first term of fake news which is being used in the political scenario was in the presidential election of 2016, wherein Donald Trump used this term for the first time. But when I compare it to the Delhi Assembly polls in 2012, a lot of things have changed. As I said, as I said right now, that how the content generation and dissemination is changing. I have taken some social media posts, some tweets of renowned politicians or people who are spokesperson at national or international level of these political parties, and try to analyze these things on contextual analysis basis. It is basically a qualitative technique wherein some elements of content, some elements of content analysis are being observed. So before heading towards the cases which I have taken for my study, I would like to tell the objective of my study. These are to understand the agenda of information in reference to defamation and communal hatred, basically through these fake information for political gains, and to examine the types of fake news that is being circulated during the election period of Delhi Assembly polls. So in my first case study that I do on the basis of contextual analysis, it was Dr. Sambit Patra's tweet. It was a false claim of that Amanatullah Khan was talking about Sharia. There was a video which was going around in social media wherein Amanatullah Khan was talking about something to attain something through a medium. Medium, basically in Urdu, the word is Zaria, but many Twitter and Facebook users use this term Zaria as Sharia, and Sambit Patra wrote a line with this, he used this video and wrote a line which I am just reading it for you. That was, "Ab Allah hi तय करेंगे या आप भी कुछ तय करेंगे." So basically, this line was an added thing to it was fuel to the fire, which was adding more to the words which were going rounds, and it was analyzed on three characteristics of contextual analysis. The first one is the characterized the description of a particular video. The second thing was the language, the kind of words which he has used, like words which could have hurt the sentiments of a particular community or a kind of, and the third thing is the rhetoric, the usage of words that have been arranged in a way to target something. So This tweet has been retweeted around 17,000 times and by many prominent BJP leaders, including Kapil Mishra, Y. Satya, who is BJP National Secretary. Similarly, one case which I took for this study was JDU leader.
Kamil sir, sorry to intervene. 5 minutes are over.
I'm just coming on to the conclusion part. There are similar tweets which were, that were disseminated during the time of Delhi Assembly polls. But one of the major highlights which I would like to, talk about in this for this particular session is three things which I noted down from the Delhi Assembly polls were that they were like there was a study which claimed that around 81% of the voters have come across fake news. It was conducted by a non-profit organization in Delhi. The second observation was that nearly 18,000 BJP tweets, Twitter handles related to BJP and 147 handles associated with Congress were, disseminating fake news. And the last, which is very important and the shocking thing as a part of observation, was that it was for the very first time in the history of politics across the world that artificial intelligence was used by Bharatiya Janata Party to produce two fake news in which the then BJP chief Manoj Tiwari was seen or heard speaking in English and Haryanvi to communicate to the masses for this. And it was recorded by Neelkant Bakshi. He was the BJP media in charge at that time. He told this how they got response from the supporters. How they have appreciated this task. So in the end, I just would like to say one thing, that masses are being targeted, now masses are being targeted on two fronts. The first one is there is a lot of fake news, and the second thing is the focus has now shifted onto the content, the venomous content that is being injected to create rift between different communities, different parties, and ultimately it is damaging the social fabric of the society, of the country, and it is both dangerous in long term and in short term.
Okay, thank you. Is there any question?
No, ma'am, there's no question as such.
No, you don't have to smile. I have a question. Okay. Tell me one thing. How does it work? This fake news. First, tell me what is the difference? I mean, these are the three terms which we have been using very often: fake news, misinformation, and disinformation. If you have to differentiate between these three in the context of like maybe elections, how would you do?
Basically, disinformation is half truth, something which is which is being which is being hidden behind a particular concept. And when coming on to the misinformation, it is completely something which is wrong. Misinformation is something which is giving you totally wrong information, and fake news is something related to misinformation that is that has no ground of reality, no empirical data, no evidences. That is something which is either said by somebody or that is either quoted by someone, and a third person is exaggerating that thing and making it or generating it in a way that is that is ultimately giving him or her some benefits.
No. See, when you say misinformation and disinformation, in both the cases, information is wrong, right?
Yes, ma'am.
In misinformation, what happens that the people who are passing on that information, they believe that it's true, and that's why they are sharing that. Disinformation is a deliberate, intentional lie, which means someone might have concocted something, fabricated something to mislead. So this is the major difference between misinformation and disinformation, and the major difference is of the intent behind that content. Now coming on to the fake news, anything like which looks like a news item, right? And we have seen a lot of screenshots of the different newspapers. We might not know which newspaper, but something which appears to be a news story, right? But something which is like not accurate, or it could be like misinformation and disinformation both, right? So this is the major difference between these concepts which we use very often when we talk about misinformation and disinformation. Now, second question from my side, because we don't have any other question. Do you think that this, especially like the elections which you had analyzed, was it an organized attempt to push misinformation or disinformation on social media?
Ma'am, as we see so many studies after election also, there was a report by the print an independent organization. They also claimed that there were around 17 or more than 17,000 Twitter handles of BJP and around 150 Twitter handles of Congress party that were disseminating misinformation or fake news. So it can be said, and it is a fact now, that be it the ruling party or the parties in opposition, they are deliberately doing this thing. They have a IT cell which is known to everyone, and not only the IT cell but the top leaders, they are also indulged in these activities. They are promoting these tweets, and yes, we can say that they have this agenda, which is.
Okay, I got it. How did you decide on the tweets? You remember sorry. Like, how did you decide that, you selected certain tweets to analyze? What was your basis for selection?
Ma'am, I selected these tweets on the basis of the amount of coverage which has been given to these tweets, and the fact-checking websites have, they have cross-checked these stories. So after analyzing these fact-checking websites only, I took few tweets and few stories for my study.
Okay, I think we have one question from someone.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. So this is again from Akriti, ma'am. So she's asking, I would like to ask your opinion, even though research doesn't allow it, on how to tackle BJP bots. I am asking this from a common person's perspective.
One thing I just said is that it is not only about BJP. Even the opposition parties, or even parties or people at the district level, or some minor level, they are also indulged in these activities. We have to, be aware of the fake news. We have to, we have to go beyond the lines. We have to cross check the things which have been said. As I told in my presentation also, one of the challenges which are coming in near future is artificial intelligence, and more challenges will come as technology will change. So we have to gear up with these things. We have to, fight against this kind of fake news by getting education, and by reading, and by cross checking too much. That is the only thing which I can say.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we'll move on. Thank you, Kamil sir. Next, we have Ms. Maneet Dabas and Dr. Navita Mahajan. Their topic is establishing the reflection of business ethics in society, corporate responsibility for private sector in modern times and years to come. Maneet ma'am and Dr. Navita Mahajan. Do we have them here? Maneet.
Yes, we have them.
We do.
Maneet ma'am, would you switch on your camera and the mic?
Next up, we have Dr. Hemant Kaushik.
I think Maneet ma'am is.
She's here.
She's not responsive.
Navita ma'am is also here. Can we start with the other presentation in that case? Hemant sir? Hemant sir.
Hi, very good evening, everyone. Anubhuti ma'am, Yashaswika ji, and Amrish sir and Sushmita ma'am, and all dear friends who are here. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just opening my presentation, just sharing the screen. Just a second. Well, the topic of my paper is basically, the paper is based on the self-regulation process or the self-regulation system, which is there in the Indian broadcast news environment and environment system and environment. So the topic is NBA versus NBF. These are the two agencies. One is quite old, formed in 2008, NBA, and NBF formed last year. Basically, there's a split in the broadcast media industry now, and what will be the scope of self-regulation in India after the introduction of this NBF? This is, I would like to start with just a simple definition of self-regulation. What is self-regulation? Because it is important to understand self-regulation before we start with this presentation. So self-regulation is basically the voluntary process wherein an organization or industry monitors monitors their own allegiance or adherence to the legal standards or the ethical standards of the industry, which have been formed or coined by themselves, and there is no interference of the third party like government in the process of self-regulation. So let me introduce what is the basic concept of this, behind this. Just give me a second. So we all know basically all those who are involved in the business of media, or those who have the idea of the television media, the emergence of television media in India. Time to time, government has come out with the idea of regulating broadcast news media. We have an organization called Press Council of India in print, but in television, we don't have any such organization. So what industry did is, industry decided to have self-regulation in rather than having government intervention in the process of regulation. So it is just to keep its freedom intact, and basically it was formed so that the free flow of information or free flow of news should be there. So for this purpose, News Broadcasters Association was formed by various news channels in 2008. NBA's work is to deal with the government on the critical issues of the industry, and also to improve the quality and standard of journalism in the country. But last year, another body was formed by some of the news channels, mostly regional news channels, and some of the Hindi news channels also, Hindi and English news channels also. This body is called News Broadcasters Federation. And now there are two self-regulatory bodies in India. There's a state of confusion also in the industry over which body will have the ultimate say or the final word on the critical issues of the broadcast media industry. And this confusion has paved its way further after Ministry of Information and Broadcasting has also given its recognition to NBF. So now there are two bodies having blessings of the government, and they are dealing in the process of self-regulation. So what is the problem? There are few questions which needs to be answered, and which I tried and find out answers of. So first, was there any need for this parallel mechanism? What will happen to the interest of the industry with two different bodies for the same purpose? Then how will these two bodies be different from each other? Will there be any conflict of interest? How would the government deal with the two self-regulatory bodies having similar purpose and nature? Which body will have the final say on the matters of the most important matters, or the matters of utmost importance? So what I did is I took two ways to get answers of all these questions. First of all, I read a lot. I found out a lot. I spoke to a lot of people, and I also collected the opinion of the experts on this particular matter. And this has been basically the qualitative study. We have both primary and secondary data for this particular research. So just a bit more about these self-regulatory agencies. Just the introductory thing, not so many slides. So News Broadcast Association was formed in 2008 and as an independent body to deal with the legal, ethical, regulatory, operational, and technical issues of private news and current affairs channels. This body, NBA, claims that it has viewership of 90%, and it has been acknowledged by Government of India, various high courts, in fact, the Supreme Court too, and the Election Commission of India. This another body, News Broadcasters Federation. It says that News Broadcasters Association, that is NBA, has never delivered justice to the regional channels, and that's why they are here. And it claims that it will address the issues of regional news broadcasters, and it will ensure that all of them are duly represented and heard. And NBA also have planned to negotiate with the government on the industry initiatives and to stop unfair practices going on in the industry. And it has also been acknowledged by the government. There's a slide in front of you. You can see the comparison between NBA and NBF. There is no much difference. You can see mostly national channels are there in NBA and mostly regional channels are there in NBF. And what are the areas they are looking after? If you go, if you see the NBA's, what NBA is doing, it is lobbying with the government on the.
Hemant sir, sorry to intervene. 5 minutes are over.
Just give me 2 more minutes. Just give me 2 more minutes. So both the associations, both the organizations are doing the same thing, except NBF has come out with 1 or 2 more things that there's a talent issue, which they are saying that there's not good talent in the industry, and they're looking after it, and there's a piracy and fake news issue. Otherwise, both are same. So what is the conflict between these two bodies? First of all, number of members versus the viewership. NBF says that we have more number of channels, and NBA says that we have more number of viewership. Then there's obviously, I said that there are 2 committees for 1 purpose, and who will have the final word. And then there is a role of government, which is very important, and that is divide and rule. Government always wanted to rule the broadcast news industry, and they have got this chance now. So I have collected these opinions. There are important people. Some of them are members of NBF. Some of them are members of NBA. One is former Union Minister of Information and Broadcasting. One is current Union Minister for Information and Broadcasting. Then there are senior journalists who are members of NBA. And you know, as I said, that NBA people are saying that it is a very good process. It is doing very well. And NBF people are saying that it is not delivering justice to the regional channels. So after the analysis of data, these following things have been found. Following findings have been formed. So I'm not going into it. I'm just directly coming into the conclusion. These are the things which I have also included in the conclusion part. So what I found out ultimately in the study is that emergence of NBF is the biggest setback for the process of self-regulation to maintain and promote high standards in journalism. One independent and autonomous self-regulatory body is required. No 2 bodies are required. 2 bodies for the same purpose would only create confusion. The whole industry needs to be on one platform to discuss and fight the biggest issues. News channels which have been given licenses should not refuse, and they can't refuse to be the part of the self-regulation process. And the channel that refuses to join that should be subjected to boycott by the government itself and by the industry. Some of the news channels have taken memberships of both NBA and NBF. We all know that they are also doing content regulation, and people are also confused. Audience are also confused. If suppose one channel is doing something wrong, and the channel is a member of NBA and NBF both, then where that particular person will complain, and it will only create confusion. And as I said again and again, that NBA and NBF would have different opinions on the same issue, then government's decision would prevail, especially in case of content regulation, and this might defeat the whole purpose of self-regulation. So these were the particular findings.
Okay, thank you, Hemant. Just one question. Do you think that this is a deliberate attempt by the government to give recognition to two bodies, working on, similar issues?
Absolutely, ma'am. I really think so, and I completely believe that this is the government has done deliberately, because they don't want these agencies to work with full freedom, or they don't want that industry or these news channels come out with their own idea of own ideas about regulation and the plans they have about broadcasting sector and all. So I would say that yes, it's a deliberate attempt, and this is only creating confusion among audiences and the industry itself.
But which one is more popular amongst practitioners, media industry, out of these two?
And NBA, ma'am, NBA, because it's an old organization. It started in 2008. It has almost all major news channels, almost all big networks are there. But the only problem was that NBA is saying that NBA never delivered any justice to regional channels. Actually, when I was doing my PhD, my topic was also self-regulation, and I read a lot. I found out that regional channels were not there in big number. So most of the channels are those who are prevailing in North India, or those who have a good audience backup, audience share in North India. So regional channels were sidelined, and this is one of the reasons that NBA itself gave a loophole to these channels to come out with another association.
Thank you. Any question, Yashasvika?
We don't have any question, but sir, there's this one observation on my part. So the one we had earlier was not represented enough of regional channels, but as this one started by Arnab Goswami is representative of regional channels. Don't you think it counters that hegemony?
Yeah, you can say that. In fact, I would say that Arnab Goswami was a person who the regulations and rules which are there with the NBA. Arnab Goswami was the person who wrote these regulations, who was the one who coined, who was one of the persons who was a part of NBA, and then he was happily the vice president of NBA for several years. Then suddenly he decided to part his way. Then suddenly he found so many problems with the NBA, and he come out with another body just to prove that I also have something. So there's a power game too in the industry, that if Rajesh Sharma can be the president of NBA, then I can also be the president of NBF. So there's a tussle between the industry itself, which you can see with the formation of NBF.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We don't have any questions, so we may start with Maneet ma'am. Ma'am, please unmute yourself. Thank you, Hemant sir.
Thank you so much.
Her paper is Establishing the Reflection of Business Ethics in Society, Corporate Responsibility for Private Sector in Modern Times and Years to Come. Ms. Maneet Dabas and Dr. Navita Mahajan, Amity International Business School, Amity University, Noida. Yes. Ma'am, there seems to be some audio problem from your side. Are you, Ritik sir, could you please assist her?
Ma'am, you are not audible.
Or probably it's the problem.
If you can remove the earphone.
Earphones.
No, from your computer.
Remove the earphone.
No, from your computer. Unplug it from your computer.
I think she's done that, sir.
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you. There seems to be some issue with the audio.
The work done by most of the scholars. This is one presentation which of course, like the one which we just listened by Hemant. I mean, that's a good work. Another which I really liked was something which was done by Deepika. I mean, that was on sensory journalism. That was a very nice, and these are the areas I think which we need to explore. Also, I could see that there is a lot of interest amongst all the scholars in media and information literacy. I think most of the presentations mention about the fake news, misinformation, disinformation. And yes, there are a lot of, initiatives which are being taken by, not only by the government, but also by all these platforms, which is very, very important. And in fact, in the chat box, I have shared with you a Google form of this largest media and information literacy network. Right now, what we are doing, I'm also part of that, that's Pactshala. This is something which has been started by Data Leads, Internews, Google. And right now, what we are doing is that we are selecting trainers who can go out and impart training in the field of media literacy, and that too at the grassroots level. Because when we talk about media and information literacy, what was happening till now was that it was limited to maybe like the researches which were done by the scholars, or maybe like in the conferences only we could listen about that. But right now, I think the time has come that we need to take it to the grassroots level. So that's why we are actually selecting number of trainers. Of course, there is a selection process for that, but for you, I've shared the Google form. Any one of you can apply for that, and we'll see. Like some of you should be part of that. Ideally, like what we are looking at is that these trainers should be in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, because we feel that most of the problems are happening there. You did mention a lot of case studies related to misinformation and disinformation, and we also have seen in the past, and we've been working with a lot of third-party fact-checking organizations, that the people who are residing in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, they are facing a lot of problems, because they're not media literate. The people who are there in metros, at least they interact with each other, they go to different maybe like conferences, and they still have that exposure. But the people there, they really need to be trained. So this is the one initiative which we have taken. Also, since you people have shown a lot of interest in fact checking and verification, some of you people have mentioned that the Google have initiated this particular the training network to train journalists in fact checking and verification, and also media educators. So we can also be a part of that. And if you cannot get this opportunity to attend face-to-face programs, I think if you go to Google News Lab, there are a number of courses which are available on fact checking and verification, and that is something which you can explore. Also, another thing which you can look at is the Facebook has started this Facebook journalism network. Right now, they are coming up with a lot of online lectures, or it's a series which has been started by them. So Tushar is the one who's leading that. So you can join that also. So there are a number of good resources which you'll have access to if you join that. So these are few points which I wanted to make. But as far as the presentations are concerned, I really like the fact that there are a number of new topics and new ideas. Whether the only thing which is missing in the presentation is that they don't look like the research presentations, frankly speaking, because when you conduct research, your focus should mainly be on your research methodology. And once you've told that these are my objectives, I think your last slide should tell us very clearly, like, how did you fulfill those objectives? That is something anyone would look at in any presentation. So that is something which is missing. Also, there were one or two scholars who actually presented data, and they said that they went out and met 110 or 100 respondents, which I personally feel is a good number. So which means that there was a good scope of doing a very good work. So that is something as a scholar, because I know that some of them, they are very young scholars. So we have to keep this thing in mind while picking up a topic for conducting research, and by going to the field for your survey or for your research. So that is something which we need to look at. Money is there, so let's see whether she is able to.
Yeah, can you please unmute yourself?
Unmute yourself.
Yes, can you
Yes,
hear me?
yes.
We could, yeah, we can.
I'll just share my presentation.
So you're basically using two devices, one for
Yeah.
audio and one for video.
Yes. Yes. I don't know. There's some problem with this app in my laptop. I'm trying to connect to you people, but I couldn't do so earlier as well. There is some technical glitch, I believe.
So do you want to share your screen? Yeah. Okay.
Just a second. Yeah, here it is. All right. Coming to the topic of our research, establishing the reflection of business ethics and society, corporate responsibilities for private sector in modern times and years to come. When we come up to organizations, nowadays we see that instead of catering to the needs of the people, the customers, the organization are more worried about their stakeholders. Instead of giving them a decent return of their investment, they are striving towards maximizing the wealth of the stakeholders by offering only those products and services for which they can create the maximum demand. In the paper, we have two particular aims. The first aim is to identify the concept of responsibilities that a business must undertake and introduce the idea of normative stakeholder dialogue for assuming such responsibilities. While the second one is about the principles of an emancipated corporation, which should be free from intensifying wealth maximization as the sole objective of the firm. The objectives of the paper were identified as the role played by business ethics in building corporate responsibility for private sector, that what are the obligations of any business towards the society or for private sector. And the second one constitutes forming the concept of responsibilities that a corporate must undertake. The paper has been divided into three segments. The first one constitutes forming the concept of responsibility that a corporate must undertake. For this particular notion, there were two major steps which were undertaken for the forming of foundation. And the first one includes responsibilities, and it is believed that responsibilities must be derived from the requirement of legitimacy. All kinds of activities which are being undertaken by human, including those taken on behalf of the business, will be based on unconditional respect for the moral rights of every human in the organization or outside the organization as well. And to gain the second point being to gain a complete understanding of moral legitimacy and responsibility, one should consider an overview of the different dimensions of the organizational legitimacy debate. Under the same part, we have another discussion which was about moral reciprocity as the principal rule in organization as a collection of unique individuals. Moral reciprocity is basically a golden rule or universal rule, because we notice that we often tend to give respect to those people who offer respect at the first place, even though we do respect everybody, but we are more polite or obligated towards those people who have a good behavior towards you. What you give is what you take, and vice versa. So it demands unquestioning obedience for unconditional respect, wherein one can expect respect for one's moral and social rights only when one is willing to give the same level of respect to the others in the community. The moral reciprocity behavior in a human interaction makes it a relevant and important aspect of business's internal and external environment. Any business organization is nothing but a collection of individuals or a community of individuals with a common goal and professional relationships with the similar other communities, and this forms the internal and the external environment of the organization as well. Looking through the business perspective, it implies that when an individual takes an administrative call, he or she should not take any decision which might hurt the moral rights of those him or around her, be it in the external environment or in the internal environment of the organization. Coming to the second portion is the legitimacy as a prerequisite of normative nature apt for profit-based organizational targets. Legitimacy is generally assumed as a decision taken, mostly decision undertaken by an entity with respect to the boundaries of social constructed and accepted norms, beliefs and values, and hence are desirable in nature. Furthermore, I would like to add that there are one part is called as intellectual legitimacy, which is part concerned to the person as an individual, and it is not being included in the corporate world as much, but moral legitimacy is something which we take into consideration while focusing from an organization point of view. Moral legitimacy arises when the activities of an individual are normatively evaluated and the perception formed on the basis of the evaluation points to the organization doing right, almost everything right. Basically, there are two ways to grant this legitimacy. The first way being the consequentiality, that one has pursued aims which are in line with the social accepted values, and the second one being through procedures, that it focuses on the ways through which the aims are pursued. Legitimacy arose from the ways.
Maneet ma'am, sorry, but your 5 minutes are over.
It's over, all right.
Yeah, if we could go on to your findings.
No, it's okay. We'll come to the conclusion. So in the upcoming slides, there were other areas concerning about where we introduced the stakeholders theory of management, including the illustrative, active, and normative way, in which we gave more focus to the normative view. And at last, there was the liberated partnership, where we showed a two-dimensional model. Hello, can you hear me?
You're audible. You're audible.
Yeah.
Is it done?
Yes, it's done.
Question. Anubhuti ma'am, any questions?
Yeah, no question as such. If there's any question from other participants, you can take. Otherwise,
No, ma'am, no questions.
no question.
No question.
Okay, so thank you, Maneet. I'll just give you my overall observation of all the presentations, not this one. I've told this before. One, I really like the idea of picking up, the topics which, the scholars have picked for the research, and the new areas. And I think we need to do more research on this. Now my suggestion is that we should explore more on, the online journalism, digital, media, sensory journalism, which she talked about. These are the new areas, these are new emerging areas. We need to conduct more research on this. Second very important thing is that since most of you had showed that interest in fake news, I just want to share with you that the Facebook has this one tool which is called CrowdTangle, right? If you use and CrowdTangle, earlier it was limited only to the journalists and to the newsrooms. Now they have made it free. It's available for the researchers. It's just that you need to get that access, so you just have to write to them. So use CrowdTangle, because in CrowdTangle what happens is that they collate a lot of information, a lot of news which actually is spread on social media platform, and this is a very important tool using which you can do a lot of research. So my suggestion, like whenever you get time, do try and explore this tool, CrowdTangle, which, and in fact, like if you go and Google the researches which are being done using CrowdTangle as a tool, you'll get a lot of researches which are being done by, a lot of researchers, world over. So this is the second thing which I wanted to share with you. Third very important thing is that, when you are sharing, your presentation, make sure that whatever work you do in research, or maybe like as a teachers, because most of them were teachers, as a teachers, when you create resources, try and release those resources as an open resource. I'm sure that these presentations will be there on YouTube, which is a wonderful thing, because people need to know. And we know that nowadays, with this pandemic, we all are moving towards online education. So the students who do not have access to good teachers, the students who do not have access to, great resources, I think for them, this is the least we can do. One is they put out our content on, maybe on social media, maybe on YouTube, or release it as an open resource so that other people can use that and they can build upon that. Another very important thing is that, especially for those who are going in for the for quantitative analysis, quantitative research, make sure that you make infographics which are based on your research, because people won't go and pick up your research study, or maybe go to a library to see what all researches have been done. I mean, people have actually stopped visiting library, which is very unfortunate, because they feel that everything is available on internet. But yeah, we know that we don't have that much of time, we cannot read the entire stuff. So converting your research findings into an infographic, I think that's going to be a very nice thing. you'll be adding a lot of resources. You'll be contributing to the body of knowledge which is being created by a lot of other scholars. So please keep that thing in mind, while you are working on your research and when you are disseminating the findings of your research. So these are the things which I, wanted to share with all this. The rest, I think I said, when I heard all the presentation.
Okay, ma'am. So we are almost done with all the presentations, and we have, like I told in the beginning, we have the best presentation, which we'll be announcing in the next session. That will be tomorrow. So before concluding, yesterday I would like to announce. Yesterday we had the technical session 3, role and effects of social media on community. And the best paper presenter for the session was Mr. Gulshan and Mr. Sarveshda Tripathi, University School of Mass Communication. And the title of the paper was Aspects of Accessibility and Construction of Social Media Messages for People with Visual Impairment. And another one that we had on Monday, that was technical session 1, Women Emancipation and Gender Discourse, a comparative study on the usage of social media among rural women population of 2 villages of Martinganj, Tehsil and Azamgarh district by Ms. Neha Bhushan and Dr. Shashikant, Himachal Pradesh University. Congratulations.
We can have only one from each.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. One from each. Okay. Yes, ma'am. So now we must proceed towards the conclusion. This was, of course, a very insightful deliberation. Various aspects were discussed. I have shared the feedback link in the chat box and also will be sharing on the ICANN tree page. Request you to please share your views regarding this. We will be announcing the result for the best presentation tomorrow. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Anubhuti, ma'am, to spare time for the session.
Yashasvika, make an announcement regarding tomorrow's sessions.
Yes, sir. Tomorrow we have, sir, I'll have to just, tomorrow we have one with the Betty Dam. She's an investigative journalist, and she will be talking about investigative journalism. And we have 2 technical sessions, one at 9 o'clock and one at 11 o'clock. One is about OTTs, and the another one is also a technical session. So we have 2 technical sessions and 1 masterclass tomorrow.
But I would like to appreciate the kind of audience you are getting for your online conference. You don't see that in the conference halls. That's a very nice thing.
One plenary also.
So 1 plenary session also. Sorry.
I can correct. The plenary is in the morning. That is at 9:30, and then the technical session 4. This is 5. Technical session 5 will be at 11, and technical session 6 will be at 2
to 4.
And Betty Dam's session will be at 4:30. She will be talking about investigative journalism, and she will be live from Brussels. So that session will be from 4:30 to 6. So that's the whole 4 sessions will be there tomorrow.
Yes. Thank you for correcting me, sir. Okay, thank you. So we would like to conclude now, Ritik sir?
No, it's concluded.
That's right.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks to all.
Thank you.
The first impression that comes to our mind about any college: tall buildings, big classrooms, large lobby areas, thick books, IT labs, assignments, class tests, and projects. Nothing besides that. Every hour, minute, second spent here help us carving and shaping our persona, cultivating innovative mindsets for the challenging world. Learning is a lifelong process. Sharing knowledge, inculcating values of life, spark the innovative horizons of mind. Fun and frolic is the nature corner here. A daily dose of thrill we are sure to get here.